or in Canada, a 2.5-week protest by BLM or Antifa or some environmental group, and not a window smashed, not a police officer attacked, no burning of buildings, no shouting curse words at the police forces, no intimidation. This has been a classic Canadian protest in this sense that A, it's a working class protest, so it's not professional. And secondly, considering what's at stake, livelihood, restriction of civil liberties, an inflammatory rhetoric from the Prime Minister, the fact that the last 2 weeks have been as tranquil as they have, that's a new bloom in the idea of Canadian temperament.
Welcome to a most special episode of Candace. Each time that I have interviewed...
Sorry to be so long.
So you and I were told a couple of months ago that by advisors just exactly what is the emergency here and why is it reasonable under any conditions whatsoever to consider this an emergency of such major proportions that our basic civil liberties have to be lifted. Then the ability to freeze and seize bank accounts, which generates distrust in the banks. The precedent to define retroactive crime, because now funding a perfectly legal protest through legal means has been criminalized and associated with terrorism and organized crime and can be punished without trial by fiat, and that appears to be permanent. Then we have the extension and redefinition of crime, because mischief has now been expanded as a category to arrest people without cause, and now you can aid and abet mischief. And then they compelled the tow truck operators to start operating, and Trudeau said they would get just compensation. And then you've been beating this drum for a long time. We've been governed essentially without Parliament for 2 years. And then this is it's very hard to say what the worst thing is that happened to Canada in the last 2 weeks, because 6 things are worse and each of them should be fatal to the Trudeau government. But I think perhaps the worst was the decision to suspend Parliament on Friday from discussing the Emergency Act because of the action that was instituted by the police as a consequence of the Emergency Act. So, issue. The typical Canadian is someone who's believed for years in the reality of peace, order, and good government, right? Our constitutional principle, and that our fundamental institutions were essentially reliable. Government, education, media, let's say. You could count on them to at least try to tell the truth under most circumstances. And so Trudeau now is facing them with a very difficult choice, which is, you either believe that all of those institutions have become corrupt and unreliable in a profound and frightening way, and that now includes the banks, or you can believe that there's a handful of protesters who have far-right ties and can be justly demonized. And I suspect for most Canadians, for many Canadians, it's easier to believe the latter, especially when that's what the Prime Minister and his cronies are saying, than the former, even though, unfortunately, and I say this as someone with a fair bit of respect for fundamental institutions and wish that they would operate properly, unfortunately, the former has proved itself, perhaps in the last 2 weeks, to be far more true than even the most cautious of us and worried of us might have predicted even a month ago. So